Hello, everyone. Simon Jacobson from New York. We will be beginning shortly, and I look forward to this program. Post-Synagogue Judaism is the question we're going to address, but we'll be waiting for people to come in, so please bear with me. I just want to register that we're here and beginning very shortly. Yeah. Meanwhile, I hope everybody's well, wherever you may be in the world. I know this is a worldwide global broadcast from different countries, and everyone has their unique challenges, but in many ways, we're all in it together. So as this is a preliminary, as you come into the program, just to register that I'm here, and we will begin, as I said, shortly. I better shut this off. Okay, my friends, Simon Jacobson here, and we will begin now. This is a live Facebook broadcast. It's an honor to be speaking to you, especially in these trying times. Trying times where we are almost all quarantined. Our lives have been disrupted in every possible way. Very few of us, if anybody, knows what the future, the immediate future will bring. But we remain not just hopeful, but strong, with fortitude, committed, more than ever to connect, to demonstrate love for each other, and that this challenge should bring the best out of us. So among the different challenges we have, of course, is one that particularly affects those that are connected to religious communities, houses of worship. So we determined, being that synagogues are closed, the conventional minyan, where people would come together to pray, and other activities in central places like synagogues, schools, are all closed down. So on one hand, that seems to be a real challenge, a negative, because this was something that we all expected and we looked forward to every week, or every day for some people, to go to their synagogue. This was their center of religious life, the place where they had classes, prayers, other activities. And now suddenly all of that has come to a stop. We're told we cannot go to synagogue. But as in all experiences, when we're deprived of something, it actually is an opportunity to look at it in a much deeper way. If it weren't for the pain and the loss and the tragedies that are happening, this is actually a very healthy experiment in every given situation, even when there's no pandemic. You may think you're dependent on something. You may think it's part of your routine. And when you look at it deeper and stop yourself from doing something, you then have to ask yourself, why am I doing it in the first place? Is it simply a ritual, a habit, a comfort zone? Everything in life is appreciated when we step back and say, what would it be like without it? Because that prevents us from taking things for granted. Just to use a simple example, the other day I was speaking to someone who works in the medical community. These are the heroes of our time, who are actually rising to the occasion, putting themselves at risk, and treating people, treating patients, many of them who may have the coronavirus. So he was telling me how difficult it is emotionally and psychologically and spiritually to see people struggling, so many people on respirators or ventilators. He said that he remembers once something I said in a class years ago that he was reminded of when he was in one of the ICUs and he saw how many people, and a few of them that he knew, patients of his that were struggling to breathe. And he remembered that what it says, King David, in the last psalm of the book of Psalms, of Tehillim, that classic work where David poured out his heart and soul and the suffering and pain he went through. And this became a eternal book that we all read and look to for hope. When we want to pierce the heavens, to cry out, we say Tehillim. So the last verse, Psalm 150 of the 150 Psalms. Kol haneshama tahalka, every soul that praises God. Says the Medrash. The Medrash is a commentary on that verse, that the word soul comes from the word breath. Neshima. It's connected. Neshama, soul. Neshima, same letters but pronounced differently, is breath. That in every breath a person takes, every breath and breath, called neshima, you praise God for that breath. Which of course brings the whole verse alive. It's not just a soul is praising God. There's a particular reason. As the Bible tells us in the beginning of Genesis, when God created the human being, he took a clump of clay, of earth, and he infused it, he breathed into it, into its nostrils, the breath of life. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. That breath of life is the soul. Now we breathe, a healthy person breathes 15 to 18 times a minute. Who even knows that? He was telling me as he's seeing people he loves, people he cares about, struggling to breathe and they can't breathe on their own, he suddenly reminded himself how much we take for granted the breath, our very breath. And King David reminds us, every breath you take, every move you make, long before a popular police rock band made these words popular, comes thousands of years ago, the verse in Psalms. Every breath you take, you praise God. Every bite you eat, you start appreciating things when you see that it's not simple to take it for granted. The same I want to propose regarding our religious communities. Now that we cannot go to synagogue and we can't do the usual rituals, we ask ourselves, so how do we worship God? How do we worship when our houses of worship are closed? And if you really think about it, it's not just challenging our religious rituals. It's actually forcing us to ask the biggest questions. The things we always saw as normative Judaism. Synagogue, Shabbat, holidays, take the children's programs, a Kiddush. Comes the high holidays. Those of us that have to say Kaddish go there for a yard site. Or we go for our bar mitzvah. Suddenly, this central location in every community called the synagogue is closed for business for now. So what is indeed the role of a synagogue? Is there religious life without a synagogue? Can we connect to God without a physical structure? Without a rabbi? What is the role of rabbis in synagogues? These are the questions that are now being asked. And not to be irreverent and not to be dismissive, but to actually appreciate what is the role of a synagogue. For many of us, it became a social scene. And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. It's a place where we connected once a week or more than once a week or whenever with others. Is that what it is? And the same can be asked about the synagogue as a microcosm of what? Of the great holy temple that stood in Jerusalem for 830 years. The first temple, 410 years, and the second temple, 420 years, which was all a replica of the first sanctuary that the Jews built, the portable one called the Mishkan, that they traveled through the wilderness for 40 years. The classic verse in Exodus, for Osuli Migdash, build for me a Migdash, v'shachanti b'seichem, and I'll rest among you. So clearly it's a central component in life. But now we're challenged, perhaps the first time in history, There were times Jews were not allowed to go to synagogues or it was dangerous to go. But collectively, all around the world, especially in a free generation where we have the freedom of religion and the freedom of expression, due to this pandemic, we now ask ourselves, so where does our soul express itself? Now, obviously, everybody understands very quite clearly that this pandemic is going to end, and we hope quite quickly, and people will be healed, and we pray and we ask for that, we beseech God. What will we have learned from all of this? When we go back and the synagogues open again, will there be any change? Is it back to business as usual? Will we appreciate and learn all about this in new ways and understand what Judaism is in a new way? What is God? Our relationship with God? What is the role of a rabbi? What are the role of the rituals and traditions? So this, my friends, are the questions we're going to be addressing. And I'm honored, as I said, to be here to speak to you about all of this. Okay, so I want to put it into context. This is not the first time this issue was addressed in history. It's actually the theme of the opening and beginning of the book of Isaiah and the close of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is made up of 50-some chapters, 56 chapters. The beginning and the end discusses this topic almost directly, in a different context a bit, but you'll see in a moment. Now, just to put it into context, the first chapter, the first verse, the first chapter of Isaiah, we actually recite in the Haftarah, you know when? The Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. The last chapter in Isaiah, we actually recited just yesterday, Shabbat, because it was Rosh Chodesh, when Shabbos is on the first day of the month. The new moon is a particular Haftarah, is the last chapter in Isaiah. And in both of them, there's scathing statements, that it's difficult even to repeat. What Isaiah says in the name of God, the prophet Isaiah says, God is looking down at his people. There's a temple, first temple, and God is seeing something he doesn't like. He's seeing tremendous hypocrisy. He's seeing there's a holy temple, and people are going through the motions. They're bringing the offerings and saying the prayers and everything that a temple is necessary to be said, but it's not consistent with their behavior. And God, in very strong terms, and I'm just paraphrasing, says the following. He says, I don't need your offerings. I don't need your temple. Hashemayim shemayim kisi. The heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. I don't need your temple. I don't need your offerings. I don't need your prayers, your lip service. I don't need you to spreading out your hands when you're ignoring the orphan and the widow, when I don't see compassion, when I see mechanical Judaism being done by rote. These are words in the book of Isaiah. And as I said, they're said both the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, which is obviously why, because that's why the temple was destroyed. What do we need a temple for, God said, if it's just going through motions? The whole purpose of the temple is that it should refine you, that I should rest among you. And to cite the great Shalah, when he speaks about a synagogue, about a Mishkan, it says, V'asu li migdash, build for me a sanctuary, and the end of the verse is very interesting. It doesn't say, I will rest in it. It says, I will rest among you. I will dwell among you. That's what it says. So you ask the question, it's not consistent. When you say, build for me a sanctuary, I will rest in the sanctuary, in it. Shechanti b'soichai, in Hebrew. B'soicham, because the purpose of the sanctuary, the purpose of the holy temple, and which is, of course, the synagogue, is a migdash ma'at, is a mini temple, is not for me to rest in bricks and mortar, in wood and in designs. Is to rest in your heart and soul. But in order to have a model, a template, we build the Beis HaMikdash. As the commentary has explained beautifully, how the entire temple is structured exactly like the human body. There are 3 sections. One corresponds to the mind, is the Holy of Holies, where the ark, the Torah, resided. The second is the Kodesh, the holy, where there were three primary vessels, the menorah, the table, lechem aponim, the shulchan, and the mizbeach, the altar, representing the right side, the left side, and the heart. And then there was the outer section, which had the outer altar where offerings were brought. Offerings from out of animals, the animal souls being brought and closer to the divine. The entire temple, there's an entire book called Teres Ha'elah from Rabbi Moshe Isserlish, the great codifier, Ramah, as he's known. The codifier of Jewish law. He wrote a whole book based on Kabbalistic and mystical teachings, how each detail in the temple corresponds to the human being. Because that's a model. And it's actually a template, a model of the entire, what's called in Hasidic thought, Seder Hishtalshus, the entire cosmic order. In other words, a human being is a small universe. That's what we're told. The universe is created by the divine in a very eloquent, beautiful structure. The temple is a model of that, and we are microcosms of that. So every aspect of a human being is represented in the temple and vice versa. Because the purpose is the building should be a template, should be a blueprint for us. That whatever is done there, we experience internally. When there's a dissonance and a disconnection, God said, I'm not here to rest in a building. I want to rest in your heart and soul. If you're not being kind and compassionate, if your behavior is not consistent with what I expect of you, I'm not looking for lip service. And that's what the verse says. He literally says those words. He says, I will not hear your prayers. My eyes will close when you raise your hands and spread out your hands because your hands are filled with blood. I was hesitating before saying some of the strong terms, but that's what he says. And there's a powerful discourse from the previous Chabad Rebbe, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. The last discourse that he delivered actually in the early years of the early 40s, in the middle of the Holocaust. And he explains that verse with a whole story with the Baal Shem Tov, that a simple person who's compassionate is much more powerful in many ways than a great scholar who prays and studies but is lacking, is doing things mechanically. Even if he's doing things right, but it doesn't have full heart and soul. Tells an entire story there, comparing the two. Because at the end of the day, the whole purpose of Torah, of Judaism, is to create refined human beings that are aligned to the divine image in which we were created. When's the last time we thought about that? When our synagogues were open and our services were going on almost automatically, we took it for granted. I'm not suggesting, God forbid, that people didn't mean well. But that's how it is. When things become routine, we take it for granted. When we take things for granted, we become complacent and we don't even appreciate our own breath. Now that the synagogues are closed, we're compelled to look inward. How do you pray? What is prayer? Prayer is the service of the heart. Do you actually need a synagogue to speak to God? Do you think God is in the synagogue more than he is in your home? Obviously not. It's one divine entity. So then you could ask the question, what do we need synagogues in the first place? The model, the template. Because a synagogue is a dedicated space that's meant to teach us a place where heaven meets earth. But the truth is, heaven meets earth in your home even more than the synagogue. But the synagogue is dedicated. I gave a class a few days ago, which I'm cross-referencing because it's quite relevant. It was called Stay Home, which is, of course, the statement we're hearing now. But with an addition, stay home, discover the center of your universe. What was the center of Jewish life throughout history? Most people would say the synagogue. Before that, the temple. Absolutely not. No one lived in the temple. As a matter of fact, the majority of the Jewish people weren't even allowed in most parts of the temple. Not only the Holy of Holies, even the other sections. They were told to make a pilgrimage 3 times a year. On Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. But that's not where they dwelled. The Kohanim and Levites all came from one tribe. They dwelled there. They served there. But they were a minority. People lived in their homes. The temple was the channel. Just like we talk about Israel as the holiest land, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, and Jerusalem as the holy city within the Holy Land. What makes it holier than, let's say, New York or London or Melbourne or Paris or Moscow or anywhere in the world? Just randomly chose some names. Is God not present everywhere? So the way the masters, the mystics teach us is this. Yes, God is present everywhere, but there are concealments from our perspective. Certain places in the world, especially when you sanctify them, it becomes more conducive. The vibe has less resistance to experience the spiritual, the divine. That's why Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. What? You can't access God on the day after Yom Kippur, or right now, middle of the year, middle of a day in the month of April. Of course you can. Hashem Echad is one divine; He's indivisible. Why is Yom Kippur the holiest day of the year? Because one day when you designate and you shut down all material activities, and you spend all day in an environment of prayer and penitence and atonement, refining yourself, it's just easier to access the divine. God is with us all the time. The question is whether we're with God all the time. The Kotzker Rebbe was once asked, where is God? He says, wherever you let him in. But there's certain situations where it's easier. Just like, let's say, we'll give an example in marriage. You love your spouse. But if you're both busy at work and distracted, it's very hard to express that love. That doesn't mean there's no love. So you designate time. Let's have dinner together. Let's have a romantic evening together. Let's go for a walk. Today, obviously, with all the guidelines that we're told. So you say, what, there's no love except when you go for the walk or whenever there's a romantic experience? Of course there is. But other things in life are somewhat like layers that block it out or conceal it would be a better way of putting it. So Yom Kippur in time is the same idea as the Holy Temple and the synagogue in space. And the same thing with us human beings. Of course you can connect to God while you're in the middle of a meal. You can connect to God while you're asleep and taking a shower. But when you designate time to study, to pray, to do a mitzvah, to do a good deed, to be charitable, it's more conducive. What we would say more revealed, more manifest. So God said to us, I will give you a space on earth called Israel, the Holy Land. In it, the holy city of Jerusalem. In it, the Holy Temple on the Temple Mount. This is a sacred place. Do not walk there casually. Do not go there unless you're allowed to go there. Holy of Holies, once a year, Yom Kippur. We read about it now in the Torah chapters. There are conditions. Not because it's off limits, it's because you need to be completely aligned with the divine to be able to enter there. Why is it there? To give you a prototype, to give you a model, a template. Let me look at the temple. Let me find how it reflects in my life. And then you have yourself a real divine experience. Now, what happens when the building becomes an end in itself and people lose their connection? They say, you know what, I'm going to synagogue. I don't have to do anything else. And they lose that consistency of being refined, consistent with what the whole purpose of a sin, v'shachanti b'seicham, is God resting in your heart and soul, or are you relying that He's resting by the rabbi and by the synagogue and by and inside the temple or the building? When that happens, that's when we have challenges. It's like the joke they tell about a guy who used to fall asleep all the time after 10 minutes of the rabbi's sermon in the synagogue. Okay, the rabbi got used to it. One day, he sees the guy falls asleep immediately. So he's thinking maybe tonight's sermon was more boring than other times. So afterwards, he asked the fellow, he said, you always fall asleep after 10 minutes. Okay, fine. At least you hear 10 minutes. Your soul hears the rest. Why this week? I see you fell asleep right away. He said, because I trust you. I know you know what you're doing. I trust you. Many of us feel the rabbi will do the job for us. The synagogue will do. V'shachanti b'sechem, God wants your heart and soul. And when there's an inconsistency, there's a big problem. The temple could not stand any longer, not because they were enemies. God allowed the enemies because the Jews were vulnerable. You cannot have divisiveness and baseless hatred and go to a holy temple and say, oh, you know what? The temple will protect me. Because the whole purpose of the temple is that you be connected to the divine. We were not created for the temple was created for us. So now in this quarantine, in this lockdown, where synagogues are closed, it is, I have no words, it's an awesome opportunity. Of course we would have preferred back to business as usual. But it's an awesome opportunity to ask that question. Why were synagogues created in the first place? What is the role of a rabbi? What is the role of ritual? So the answer is, it's an opportunity to revisit all of this and come to discover, lack of a better way of putting it, a new way of looking at synagogue, at services, at rabbis, at the teachings, at God himself. A new way of looking. Because when they're stripped from the regular routines and normal, then you have to really appreciate it from scratch and ask the question, why was it there in the first place? Famous statement from the Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev. I use it in my book, Toward a Meaning for Life. It's one of my favorites. A self-proclaimed atheist was his neighbor. The rabbi says, Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, the lover of Jewish people, unconditional love, non-judgmentalism. In every fiber of his being, he was completely non-judgmental. He says to the self-proclaimed atheist, why don't you come with me to synagogue to pray? Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. He says, Rabbi, you know I'm an atheist, I don't believe. What does Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev tell him? The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Think about that. I don't know the end of that story, but I would hope to believe and want to believe that made the person think. Sometimes our experiences with God, with synagogues, with rabbis, with Judaism, with formal, established religion has been very negative. And not necessarily because we're wrong. We actually had negative experiences. You saw hypocrisy, saw judgmentalism, condescension, money being a distraction. Everything you want religion for, anything you want a connection to God, you see has now contaminated even our synagogues. So what does a person who grows up, a nice, beautiful child, see? After a while, you say, this is not for me. I'm looking for God. More and more, even worse, you start thinking, that's what God is about. Why would I have a relationship with God? I remember years ago, I met Woody Allen. One of my students knew him. And he's, of course, the epitome. He's the personification of the cynicism. The cynicism, like saying the famous joke among hundreds, which I can share, but I'll share one. Guy comes to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, I hear the Torah has the answers to all the secrets of life. He says, of course. He says, will you teach it to me? Of course. How much will you charge me? He says, it's free. Free? Wow. He's doubly impressed. He's going to get the secrets of life without any cost. Okay, beautiful. As the rabbi told him, God didn't charge us when he gave us the Torah at Sinai. Moses didn't charge us when he passed it on to us and taught it to us. How could I charge? Beautiful. They sit down, they open up a Chumash, a Bible, a Torah. It's all in Hebrew. And the rabbi says, Hebrew lessons will be $20,000. Imagine now, what does that story tell you? Do you think that person's ever coming back to that rabbi again, to that synagogue? Of course not. That's the punchline. That's a Woody Allen classic. But I'm not going to blame it on him. He definitely did a lot to advance the stereotype, as many others in the modern culture. And that's what they experienced. And I don't even want to blame them, because they didn't see an alternative. That's what I told him when I spoke to him. And he couldn't accept it. I told him the story of Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. He said, yeah, I know all these stories. Couldn't accept it. And I said to him, 3,800 years of Jewish history, you think was all based on this type of superficiality and hypocrisies and inconsistencies and dissonance? And he couldn't hear it. Didn't want to hear it. My point to make is that many of us, maybe not those listening here, because the fact that you're listening, it's already you're receptive. I've traveled this country, I've traveled the world, not now, but in my years, especially after my books were published. And I met people in Barnes and Nobles, in bookstores, on television interviews, people who wrote to me that would never have walked into a synagogue in the first place, not just today, ever. It was not their place. And many had negative experiences. Many were completely apathetic. Their grandparents already had negative experiences. By now, the whole thing is not an option. And I saw it with my own eyes. Once you have someone going to a synagogue, at least once a year or a few times, there's some connection. I don't know what their connection is, but at least there's some. Either it could be guilt. Some people feel responsible. Kaddish, Yartzeit, whatever. A bar mitzvah. But even that is now challenged. So this is an opportunity to reset the whole, to revisit and reset what do they say? Reboot the attitude to synagogues. What is the role of a synagogue? If it's like the story I just told, or another story which I also I always share, it just captures the mood. Two guys get lost in a hot air balloon. One guy looks to the next and say, "Where are we?" We have no idea. Okay. They're maneuvering. They finally see a guy down below and they yell, "Hey, yeah, what can I do for you? Where are we?" And he answers, "You're in a hot air balloon." A gust of wind comes by, whisks them away. One of them looks to the next and says, "What was that?" He says, "That was definitely a rabbi." He says, "How do you know?" Because what he said was true, but irrelevant. Another classic. I can't tell you the laughter that comes from many different audiences when I tell this joke, which to me indicates the tragedy. Because that's the experience, of course. Rabbis are nice people, good intentions. Some of them are very honest. Some are not. That's why I often hesitate even being allowed to myself be called rabbi. Because I don't know what you mean by rabbi. You mean it as a compliment, or you mean it as an insult? Or maybe as something like, you're not one of us. You don't relate to us, or you have your own. The point I'm making is we live in a world filled with such stereotypes. And stereotypes like paranoia, they say, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean no one wants to get me. Just because it's a stereotype doesn't mean it's not true. Unfortunately, many of these stereotypes are true. But we have now an opportunity, all of us, those that are synagogue goers or those that are not, those that go casually, sometimes more less often, to revisit what is the whole purpose of it. And maybe that's why God said, stay home, review. I'm not interested in lip service. I'm not interested in just doing rituals and very strong language. I want you heart and soul. I want you to recognize that the purpose of existence is not building religious structures. It's not institutions. It's that the human being created in the divine image is an ambassador, an agent of light. I want you to struggle. Yes, you have an animal soul and a divine soul, a voice of selfishness and self-centeredness and self-interest, and another voice that's transcendent, that's selfless, that's noble. One is a taker, one is a giver. That's how I created you. Don't feel upset. Everyone has that challenge. Now, I've given you the strength, God says, to turn yourself into a temple, into a sanctuary, into a walking sanctuary, a walking menorah, a walking shulchan table, a walking altar, a walking holy of holies, that you personify, you epitomize, you express, you channel what godliness is. The refinement of a human being, the deep compassion and love, that life is not just to serve yourself, it's to serve a higher purpose. And here, I created a situation. Now, why it comes with pain and loss and tragedy, that's beyond us. But let's talk about what we can learn from it. I've created a situation where I've shut down, at least temporarily, that outer world, where your schedules and your routines and your plans, yes, including your religious plans. People had past Pesach plans, Passover programs. I was one of them. People have summer plans, schedules, everything we relied on, including our religious structures. It's not business as usual. Again, why? I don't know why God did it. But what we can learn from it? Tremendous. We can revisit everything. It's like restarting. God forbid, it's like you have a situation where everything is going a certain way, then you lose your entire business. I say, God forbid. So you can either lay down and die, or you dig deeper and say, let me review, why did I do this business in the first place? I remember once in my own office, full of paper. I hoard paper. And then something happened. There was a water accident, whatever. A lot of paper had to be thrown out. So first I was really, really angry. I was really, really frustrated. What do you mean? This paper, maybe this is important. I was trying to sell. Then I sat back and I smiled to myself. You know what? Great opportunity. Cleanup time. Will I die? God forbid. What will happen if I don't have this particular paper? It was lying there anyway for 5 years. You didn't do anything with it. It's like letting go. It's like recognizing that life is a journey. A chick to come out of an egg, the egg has to crack. But are we going to hold on to the egg, or are we going to look for the chicken? Are we going to worship the present structure, or are we going to look what's the purpose of it? What's coming out of it? So it's very clear, without question, just as the world is being challenged in all ways, going back to our theme here, our entire Jewish and religious lives are being challenged. And I say this to all of us, even those that don't have a religious life. As a matter of fact, I never liked the word religious. Because what does it sound like? You have life and then there's religious life. What does that mean? For many, it's ritual. Today, we have the opportunity to realize that behind the ritual, add three letters, S-P-I. It's spiritual. There's statistics that show in the United States, this goes back not now, for years, that over 90% of Americans, and probably the same as in the world in general, believe in some form of spirituality, soul, God. Only 40% or so associate with some affiliate and associate with some religion. That's a big discrepancy. Why? Because religion is seen as ritual, tradition, synagogues, prayers. It could have very positive elements too. Structure, family, community. Spiritual is seen as freedom, free-spiritedness. Many will say the more religious someone is, the less spiritual they are. The more spiritual they are, the less religious they are. They're not so didactic and dogmatic in the details. What are the knee-jerk reaction when you hear the word religion? I've tested this many times. In many cases, it's negative terms, but I just gave a bunch of positive ones. Ritual, community, holidays, rabbis, commemoration, etc. Structure. The negative ones are fear, punitiveness, punishment, guilt, anger. The list goes on. Almost every form of neurosis is connected with it. You know what? All that are true stereotypes. Now it's time to let's reset the reset button and go back. Why was a temple created in the first place? To be a channel, to be a model, a prototype for what it means to be a completely refined human being. So yes, it's not optional. If you are praying and you're not more refined, there's something terribly missing. If you go to synagogue, but you don't become more divine and a sacred person, it's like someone eating kosher, but you're not kosher. Keeping Shabbos, but not being Shabbosdik. It's all about the internalization. Now, you may argue, what about those that just do something? Is it better to give charity even if you have no feeling? In some mitzvahs, yes, because at least you're helping someone. It's not the optimal. The optimal is not just giving charity, but giving with a smile, giving with feeling, with love. And there are mitzvahs that if you don't have the right intention, the whole mitzvah is worthless. Offerings, even prayer. The Baal Shem Tov once came to a town. He was looking for a synagogue. Okay, they show him, they point to a synagogue. He walks in, comes running out, and a minute later, the guy says, "What's the matter?" He says, "There's no room for me there. It's packed." He says, "Packed? It's an empty synagogue. Let's look inside." He opens the door. It's full of seats. It's not that packed. Baal Shem Tov said, "You don't understand." The Zohar says that prayer without intention, without love and awe, ava and yira, is like a bird without wings. Love is one wing, awe is another wing. These are two emotions. If you just say lip service, then the prayers have no wings to fly. And I came in there and I felt claustrophobic. I felt completely suffocated because there were so many prayers that were like grounded birds and couldn't fly anywhere. So it wasn't the physical human beings that was so overpacked. It was the prayers that weren't going anywhere. And Baal Shem Tov didn't mean as a critique. He meant to point out an important lesson, that you can do things by lip service and mechanical, but it's not with your heart and soul. Something missing. And sometimes that missing thing is more important than the action itself. Now, we still say sometimes we need to do things in automatic pilot. That's our habit. That's our routine. Sometimes it's better than nothing. But in the big scheme of things, it can be a nightmare, a disaster. Look at what our children will learn from us. Our children will learn not just what we do, but also how we do it. They see we do things mechanically and automatically, and there's no heart and soul. They say, you know what? That's the way you do it. I remember visiting Edgar Bronfman Sr. He wrote me a beautiful little card after he read my book, Toward a Meaningful Life. So I called his office. I got an appointment just to meet him. Extremely cordial. Seagram's Empire. It was on Park Avenue in Manhattan. In the middle of our conversation, he says to me, "You know, I want to share with you something. When I was a 9-year-old boy growing up in Montreal, Canada, I went to synagogue with my father. We went. The prayer service took maybe 15, 20 minutes. I couldn't believe how fast it was. My father, of course, prayed with everybody. We went out of the shul. I said to my father, how do you pray? He says, that's how it is. That's what we do. Did you understand what you read? Because, even reading 5 pages takes a little concentration. This was 20, 30, 40, 50 pages. He says, no, I didn't understand what I read, but don't worry about it. Nobody else does either. Edgar Bronfman looked me in the eyes and said, I never walked back into a synagogue for almost 40 years. That was enough. I heard that. A child, impressionable child. Nobody else does. This is, in other words, what is this, a game? We're just doing it out of guilt? Out of what? Ritual? Thoughtless? Soulless? Heartless? He says, in my late 40s, I began to relook. He says, I married out of the faith more than once. I began relooking at my Judaism in the mid-40s. He said to me these words. I remember it like today. He said, if you can create a plan to reach 9-year-olds like myself, to make sure they don't have the experience, I will do whatever it takes to help you do so, funding and so on. It never materialized for different reasons, but it was so moving to me because it captured the story of millions, really millions, I would say. Each in their own way, maybe not to that extent, everybody in their own form. And now I look, 2020, supposed to be the year of vision, 2020 vision. In Hebrew, Tafshin Pei. It's a significant milestone. And we're forced to be home. Some people complaining, I need my minyan. Some people unfortunately behave recklessly, and I want to clarify that that is not representative of Judaism. Because when the Torah says and doctors say, stay home, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what God wants, the same God that created synagogues. But above all, it's not just about staying away from synagogues because we need to be quarantined and not infect others or be infected to protect ourselves and our loved ones and others. It's also a tremendous opportunity to look at the purpose of it all in the first place. And that when we return to synagogue, to come with this new appreciation, completely new appreciation. So to sum up, a synagogue is a house of God that is meant to rest within you. You go into a synagogue, it's all about you, not about the building. Yes, support it, donate to it, and so on. What is a rabbi? A rabbi is an informed individual who's committed his life to be devout and to live up to God's expectations. And he's 24/7, that's his job. Is he perfect? No, there's no one perfect on earth. But that's what he aspires to. If there's overt hypocrisy and you don't see the rabbi living up to that, there's a problem. Just like there's a problem if it's a synagogue that technically is a synagogue, but you don't feel the heart and soul. So this is a time for a revolution. Every synagogue can use a new approach. When I say new, I want to point out it's not new. It was the way it was meant to always be. That's the way it was. I wonder sometimes why the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal, the Holy Arizal, often prayed in the field, Friday night especially. And there are questions. Halacha, Jewish law says, should be in a building for respect, for concentration. But still you find Isaac spoke in the field. Sikha, that's where we learn prayer from. Perhaps the field was more natural. It didn't have the human man-made structures, which also indicates bureaucracy. Humans getting in the way. A synagogue and a rabbi and everything about Judaism, ritual, was never meant to get in the way. It was meant to be tools for us to be more divine, to be more refined. And I say it again and again. There's no one that will disagree with this because this is what it says in the sources. I didn't come up with this. It was impossible to create such a revolution as long as we were going, because as long as you're on the merry-go-round, as long as you're in the rut, and your routines, for good or for bad, very difficult to pause and say, 1 second, let's press the reset button. Let's recalibrate. Let's reboot our entire way of looking at it. But now that we're here, this is what we should be talking about. I'll share another anecdote that actually happened. It's interesting. I was invited in a certain city. I don't want to mention the city for obvious reasons. There was a big argument in a community a synagogue was taken over by another synagogue. This synagogue was a synagogue that did not have a mechitza. A mechitza is a partition between men and women. And it was a big debate. Part of the community said, let's put up a partition. And if not, I'm not going to come to the synagogue. Another part said, no, you make a partition, I'm leaving. And they could not come to terms. The rabbi who knew me, not closely, but he knew of me, called me and said, I'm a crisis state and I need you to come and save this situation. As soon as I heard what's going on, I said, what are you talking about? Why would I come to a situation? There's no way. It's irreconcilable. It's not my problem. It's your problem. I didn't like saying it, but that's what I said. He said to me, but you come from the outside. You're more objective. People may listen to you. There are a lot of people who respect you here. They've read your materials. They like what you do. But I felt, what am I going to do? How am I going to make everybody happy? Impossible. But then, on the other hand, I was trained. You have to do what you can. And finally, I said to myself, listen, I'm coming in. I may cause more damage, but I'm leaving. So, it's not my problem. I didn't mean it quite that way. You get the idea. But what do I have to lose? Let me go. I go down there. But I made a condition. I said, I want to come early Friday morning. I want to meet the women who were leading the charge against the partition, against the mechitza. I want to meet with them beforehand. Not on Shabbos, on Friday afternoon, or Friday or late morning. Fine. They titled the Shabbos, The Great Divide, the mechitza in a synagogue. The Great Divide, which of course has many meanings. Come down there, and as planned, a group of women, they were like the leaders who were really against the partition, meet with me. They were not a captive audience, let me put it that way. Very hostile. They were sitting there, tough, and I saw they were ready to stone me. I began and I said the following. I said to them, the reason I asked to meet with you is because clearly you're leaders in this community. I'm not coming here to make trouble. I'm coming here to see how I could help. If I can't help, I can't help. But I felt talking to you directly, one-on-one or as a group, we can maybe just give me a little sense of what's going on, because I don't want to come into a situation like a bull in a china shop. I want to hear what's going on. I'm not going to go through all the details. There's a point I want to make that's relevant to our discussion. So the women, I can't say they warmed up, but they began to share with me the fight and what. I said, so give me both sides of the argument. They said, look, we grew up without any partitions. As a matter of fact, one of them said, I grew up with a partition. I always felt I was like in a pig pen. My mother would go, I couldn't stand it. As soon as I became a teenager, I stopped going to synagogue. The whole thing reminds me of women being put down. We live in an open society, egalitarian society, equality. What is this? God is only for men? Synagogue is only for men? We want to be treated. What was this? I want to be with my family all week long. We're all working and so on. I want to be with my family. Each one had their story. I said, what about the other? The others, they're just holding on to old traditions. That's their comfort zone. I said, do you think it's reconcilable? They said, no, not really. We're just all locked into our positions. So I said to them, let me ask you a question. Do you know why there's a mechitza in the synagogue throughout history? Why was a partition put up? One woman said, because women are distraction. I said, yeah, but then you should put up a mechitza everywhere, in the house, in the office, everywhere. I said, do you know why there's a mechitza? Let me ask you a better question. Why is there a synagogue? Who said we should make synagogues? I know it's a nice idea. People come together to pray. They didn't know. I said, you know where synagogue comes from? Yecheskel the prophet. When the temple was being destroyed, he said to God, you're destroying the temple. So I understand there's reasons. The community will become scattered. The Jews will be exiled. How are they going to connect with you? They need something. So God said, build for me a shul. The migdash ma'at, and I will be for them a mini sanctuary. So this great temple that was the temple for all Jews, wherever they travel in the world, let them build a migdash ma'at, a mini sanctuary, a mini shul, and a mini beis medrash, a mini like a yeshiva. And from there became the concept. I said, so the whole idea of a synagogue is a replica, a microcosm of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the temple of Jerusalem, you may not know this, I told them, was also built by the instructions of God in the chapter Trumot, Tetzav, the end of Exodus. A bunch of chapters, every detail. And every detail, as I mentioned earlier, I shared with them, is a microcosm of the human being. It's a microcosm of the divine cosmic structure of all existence. So everything is precise. It's like an architect, a genius architect. even a human architect, built this enormous palace. And we come in and say, you know what, I don't really like this room or that room. First, know at least what his intentions were. It's like the famous one when Mozart presented to the Archduke of Austria, Ferdinand. One of his magnum opus was music. The Archduke, who thought he was a connoisseur of music, said to Mozart, beautiful, but far too many notes. And Mozart purportedly responded, yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary. Now imagine the divine architect, God, a cosmic engineer, built something. At least know the reasons. So when we look in the Holy Temple, what do you see? There's an Ezras Anoshim, there's a section for men, there's an Ezras Anoshim for women. As a matter of fact, most of the temple is off limits to most of the Jews. The Holy of Holies, the Holy, the Azara, everything in the main sanctuary, no one was allowed in. The women looked at me, they couldn't believe it. They said, so why did they go there? I said, they didn't go there, the Jews. They went only a few times a year, or when they needed to go for offerings and different reasons. Very interesting. So I said, so we build a temple, a mini sanctuary, we build it like in the model. So you can ask, why is there an Ezras Noshim in the synagogue? Why is there in the temple? The answer is because God created men and women. There's men's tennis, there's women's tennis. We'd all like to play together, but they're different. They're physiologically different and psychologically different. Not because one is better than the other. Then I pointed out to them, I said, remember the book everybody read? Men from Mars, Women from Venus? Yeah, of course, John Gray. I mean, it had a lot of platitudes, a lot of whatever. I said, everyone loved that book, right? You loved it. Now, Mars and Venus are much far apart than the men's section and the women's section in a synagogue. So why do you applaud that book and reject the idea of a structure in a synagogue? Imagine telling all the women to go to Venus and all the men to Mars. They really would not be able to get together very often, would they? Because you have to understand the purpose of the mechitza. It's like the windpipe and the food pipe. They'd love to be together. Let's create a union between them. Then we'd have, God forbid, death. Structure in existence is healthy as long as it's not abusive, as long as it doesn't defy what we naturally like. The structure is what creates the unity, recognizing the boundaries. Anyway, I elaborated. I said musical notes, each one in its place. Suffice it to say, before Shabbos came, these women became the advocates for the mechitza. They had never heard this before. We revisited the whole purpose of a synagogue, was to connect to God. And I said, connect to God. You build a synagogue. You decide where the mechitza should be. Maybe the men should decide. You decide. Find a good architect. But we want to align ourselves to the temple, which is align ourselves with the way God created us. And he did create Zohar and Akeva, male and female. We have much in common. And in many situations, we are together. And a husband and wife, in a sacred way, have a sacred union. They become one flesh, which is no mechitza at all. But then everything has its time. Everything its situation. Just to use and show the example of when you revisit something, you appreciate it in a completely new way. This is the story, my friends. So now that our synagogues are closed for the time being, we can look at it as a tremendous loss, or we can look at it, you know that it's closed? Let's revisit. Why is it there in the first place? What's the role of a rabbi? This is all about us. It's about us connecting. And when you think about it, you can connect in unprecedented ways with God right now. Who stops you from praying in the morning? Open up a prayer book. And it's on no one else's terms. There's no minyan. There's no one you have to follow. You don't have to keep at any pace. You read it in your own language. Make it yours. Personalize it. Take a prayer, one prayer. Moda Ani, I acknowledge to you that for returning my soul. I thank you for returning my soul. Shema Yisrael, listen, hear, O Israel, God is one, the idea of oneness. And today we need this even because it helps us, our spiritual fortitude internally. Prayer is actually a tremendous tool to counter the isolation, the demoralization when our outer world is so disrupted. They call it mindfulness. Others called it meditation at some point. This is all essentially the beginning of what prayer was also to be, a silent space within you. Shut off the sounds around you. Connect to the divine. You'll say, what about the minyan? A minyan was meant to be a synergy that helps individuals connect. It was never meant to replace individual worship, individual connection. That's another one of the problems, that it became an end in itself. As a matter of fact, you pray in a synagogue, you're supposed to say the prayer quietly, only between you and God. But in synergy helps. When a lot of people are doing something together, there's a synergy. But the synergy is to enhance the individual, not that the individual is annihilated by the synergy, by the group. Now we have that opportunity. Something that we would not have done on our own. We have the opportunity to review the role of a rabbi. Our rabbis now being very creative, original, innovative, how to connect. And I'm not here to criticize or not criticize. I wrote an article years ago. Someone asked me, how do you find a true rabbi? This rabbi tells me that rabbi is no good. That rabbi tells me this rabbi is no good. So let's go back to the original. What is a rabbi? Why do we need rabbis? Why can't you connect to God without a rabbi? And I'm not talking about the administrative role, or fundraising role, or the cheerleader role of a rabbi. What is a true rabbi? A rabbi is a soul doctor, a person who's a little more sensitive, a little more knowledgeable. Not the knowledge, book knowledge, in human relations, in human kindness and compassion. A rabbi that knows a lot of information but is an insensitive person shouldn't be a rabbi. To be very perfectly blunt, that's not the job he should have. It's a person who cares. The first rabbi of all, you know who the first rabbi was? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, our rabbi, our teacher. How is he tested by God to know whether he's the appropriate leader? With sheep. The first description of Moshe, Moshe was a shepherd. The Medrash tells us. Moses was a shepherd by his future father-in-law Jethro, Yisro. He tended to the flocks, thousands of sheep. One day, one of the sheep is missing. Moses, first of all, recognized that even though there were thousands of sheep, he recognized, where's the sheep? He began looking. He was desperate. He found the sheep a while away from the flock, had found a brook of water. The sheep was thirsty, went to drink. Moses felt sad that he was not sensitive to the sheep's needs, put the sheep on his shoulders, carried back. God said, if a man is so sensitive to sheep, when no one's watching, who would know? One shepherd. And that care, he's the man I want to take care of my people. That's why a leader is called a Roy Yisrael, shepherd in Israel. Same with King David, he's described as shepherd. He was sensitive to the sheep. That's a true rabbi. All rabbis live up to this higher standard, but at least if they aspire to, and that's their role. They're soul doctors. Unfortunately, situations, and maybe we should make sure that it's not that way, some have had to become administrators and bureaucrats and political, have to fight with boards. It's a whole other discussion. That's not what a synagogue was for. Synagogue is a place of God, a home of God, humility, no egos. That's what a good rabbi is about. So I hope I'm not trying to undermine any rabbis, but these are not my standards. It says a good rabbi, four requirements. Most people know the first three, not the last one. One, knowledgeable in Torah. Just be knowledgeable, just like a doctor has to be knowledgeable in medicine. Number two, ordination. Smicha, like a doctor gets a degree. And three, shimush, experience. Doctors who go into residency, apprenticeship, to learn. But there's one fourth thing that's most important. Yireh Shamayim, fear of God. He recognizes, the rabbi, that he's not the authority. He's only a servant of God. And human beings are divine, in creating the divine image. The rabbi is not better than you are. He's more humbler than you are. That's what Moses was, the humblest. All these are characteristics and criteria that we now can revisit as we look at our lives, including the ritual part of our lives, the traditional part, the synagogue part, the rabbinic role, and all of Judaism, the mechanical part. Not to be mechanical. Bring your heart into it. God said very harsh words about a Judaism that becomes mechanical. Even on a lesser level, mechanical Judaism is static. There's no growth involved. Judaism is meant to be growthful, vibrant, dynamic, constantly mobile, looking to expand. Yes, there are guidelines, rules, just like there are rules how you play a piano, how you play an instrument. But then it's create magic. That's what Judaism is meant to be, to create magic. Wings that allow us to take flight, to soar. Not just body weight. So often Judaism has become body weight, technical, mechanical, by rote, routine. You add any synonyms you like. Here's an opportunity to step back and appreciate it all and say, one second, what's the soul within it? Where are the wings? How does it help my soul fly? How does it help me touch the music of Judaism? Not just you look at the musical notes, you can't read notes, it's gibberish. Then suddenly someone sits down at an instrument, a violin, a piano, another instrument, and it comes alive. How much of our Judaism was just following by rote? Now, and in our homes, when we're stripped from that ritualistic routine of going to sin. Yeah, I'm going to shul. There's a kiddush, there's a class, and even I had many beautiful things, but now that's taken away momentarily in order for us to connect to God in the essential way, you and God alone. That's what it means to be in a situation as we are now. You and God alone. You have no structure to rely on, no crutches, no comfort zones, no security blankets. What are you going to be like? How will you embrace that God? And I want to conclude with a story that happened with me that is one of the defining moments. After my book was published, I was sent on a book tour across the country. Toward a Meaningful Life I'm talking about. I ended up in Santa Cruz, California. I was speaking that night in a store called Gateways. It was a new age bookstore, not a Jewish bookstore, but there were a lot of Jews in Santa Cruz. If you've ever been there, it's situated between the Pacific and the mountains. Very beautiful climate, very calm, antithetical to New York in every way. Not today necessarily, but the way it was then. No one seemed to be rushing. No one seemed to even have a job. I remember seeing a bunch of young people milling about. I asked, what are you doing? We're in bliss. I didn't ask whether it was natural or induced. Then I speak in the bookstore. Maybe 250, 300 people. Very comfortable carpets, people sitting on the floor. It was one of those places you felt the spiritual vibe. You felt the soul. I didn't have to go through prerequisite Western style marathon arguments to prove that there's some transcendent force in existence. There are people who that was a given. Anyway, I finished my talk. A woman raises her hand. She says to me, in front of everyone, I could see right away she spoke Yiddish fluently from the way she spoke. And she said, I grew up in Borough Park, Brooklyn. Not far from I live in Crown Heights in Borough Park. Very bastion of a lot of Orthodox, very religious Jews. I went to Beis Yaakov, a very religious school. And I have to tell you, it was a nightmare in my life. My parents were Holocaust survivors. And one was angrier than the other. Judaism for me was all about anger, guilt, punishment, punitiveness. Constantly. That was the old thing. Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? I was a very curious girl. I used to ask a lot of questions. Questions were forbidden, not allowed. Don't ask questions. Just be a good Yiddish meidel, a good girl, and listen to what what your mother, grandmother, great grandmother did. At age 17, she says, I had an addict. Her words were, my soul was asphyxiated. I was suffocating spiritually. And I decided one day, I picked myself up. I was 17. I packed. I never told anyone. I left, never to return. Went to the West Coast. From the way she described it, it sounded like she was in the late 60s. It must have been in the late 60s. She was in the late 60s, meaning 68, 69, 1968. Los Angeles. I ended up in the Haight-Ashbury scene in San Francisco. Then finally landed here in Santa Cruz. I've been here ever since. I found my peace. Where did I find my peace? I found it in Zen Buddhism and in LSD. That's what she said. I haven't seen a rabbi like you in years. Where do you come from? Where do you get this stuff? You speak so comfortably about soul, about God, personally, warmly. That's not the Judaism I grew up. The Judaism I grew up was a stick. It was a punishment. God said this, and if you don't do it, you'll be struck by lightning, etc. I saw in the faces of many, they had similar questions. So I said, well, we Jews have this thing called a 613-step program. She smiled, some laughed. But afterwards, when the crowd scattered, around 5, 6 people, including this woman, remained, because I offered that to speak with them. And we went into one of these marathon hourly talks. We went to store closed at 1 a.m. We went outside. It was a beautiful night. We sat on a bench, 5, 6 of us, till 4 a.m. probably, talking about those college night marathons, about what is real and what is not real, and God and goodness and Holocaust and what's the purpose of life and suffering, you name it. I shared with her the following. which I think is a tremendous way of looking at this period in time. I said to her, I don't judge you for what you did, because maybe if my soul was asphyxiated, who knows what I would have ended up doing. But I have to tell you that they only taught you half of the story, half of Judaism, the body half. They never taught you about the soul. And I shared in a metaphor, or I would say it's an anecdote, a parable, maybe best. I don't even know where I read it. That when God created the world, he created the nightingale with a beautiful voice. The bird with a beautiful voice. The bird would serenade into the night. One day the bird comes to God and says, thank you for my beautiful voice. Everyone's enjoying it, but there's a problem. I'm vulnerable. I have no defenses. Everyone may be enjoying. I'm perched on a branch in the dusk, serenading into the night. Everyone's enjoying it, but there's one animal, a predator, looking for a good meal. Be attracted to this piece of meat, myself. Give me something to protect myself. So God offered the bird a beak, a sharp beak, like a razor-sharp beak. The bird studied and examined. A beautiful bird like me, an elegant bird like me with a nose like that? No. Then God offered the bird claws, sharp claws. They're another form of defense. No, not for me. It's not becoming. Finally, God says to the bird, okay, I'll give you wings. The bird looked at the wings, never saw wings before, and said, I don't understand. You're the master of the universe. You created the world with such design, such magnificent design. I have enough body weight to carry with me, and you give me 2 extra pieces of dead meat, a dead flesh, a dead weight? God said, no, little bird. These are called wings. You use these wings to soar, to fly, so if there's a threat, you just fly away. So I told the woman and the others, I said, Torah and mitzvahs, Judaism, can appear to be a lot of dead weight. You know how many mitzvahs there are? 613 laws. Not all of them are applicable today. Everything is regulated. How you wake up, how you go to sleep, how we born, how we die, how we love, sexuality, laws of Passover, even how you tie your shoelaces, how you cut your nails. Everything is regulated. You'd say, okay, certain laws make sense. Loving another, compassion, honoring parents, whatever. Do not steal. But so many of them, what do I need all this weight for? But then you discover it's not weight, it's also wings. No bird in the world would reject wings, even a bird that's on a diet. Now, birds don't go on diets, of course. What's the saddest thing besides a grounded bird? Is a bird with wings is even sadder. A bird with wings and doesn't know it can fly. They taught you the weight. They never taught you the wings. Someone offers you 100 pounds of stones, carry it, and it belongs to you. You'll say, what do I need it for? What do I need to exert myself? I'll give you 100 pounds of diamonds. You'll say, give me 200. Now, do 100 pounds of diamonds weigh less than 100 pounds of stones? No, but the value, the wings, then I'm ready. If I'm going to sit down at a piano or an instrument to play, and I'm reading and it's just discipline, and I don't hear any magic, it's very difficult to maintain that. Show me the wings, show me how to fly. And then the mitzvahs become music. And the flesh become wings. That's what we have the opportunity, my friends, to discover now. The wings of Judaism, the music of Judaism. Sometimes that gets drowned out when we're into the ritual and the mechanical. Now, there's a lot to say about ritual and mechanical. Once there's also the music. They combine together the fusion of body and soul, the fusion of action and spirit. To have spirit without action is not grounded. To have action without spirit can become hollow, static, stagnant. Now we have an opportunity to create a revolution and actually reclaim what Judaism was always meant to be, what the synagogue was always meant to be, what a rabbi was always meant to be, what mitzvahs are not just commandments. Mitzvahs come from the word connections. Connections, very intriguing. You're connecting to a transcendent place within yourself and beyond you. May God bless each one of us to use this time, this valuable time, invaluable time, where we are compelled to be in a place which often a lot forces us to have to dig deeper and reach discover and reach deeper resources within ourselves. That's what we need to be doing now. God should protect you all, protect every one of us. Those that need healing should have complete recovery, as if it never happened. This pandemic should come to an end, but what should not come to an end is the discoveries of our own inner selves, the discoveries of our deeper relationship with God, with prayer, with Torah, with mitzvahs, with Judaism, our deeper connection to what the mini sanctuary and temple is meant to be, our deeper connection to what our spiritual mentors and soul doctors are meant to be. And may we enter a new age, that after the egg is cracked, a new chicken, a new life emerges, a new paradigm shift, a paradigm shift that reclaims what was meant to be in the beginning of time, a material world that becomes a divine home, a divine garden. May each of us do our little part, and through a ripple effect, we have the opportunity to create now a global pandemic of kindness and goodness, a global pandemic of goodness and kindness, of spirit, of higher spiritual consciousness, because the material world has been shaken up, has been in many ways compromised. So allows us to see the inner forces at work. God bless you all. And for any more materials, please go to meaningfullife.com/corona. Every day we're updating more content for different audiences, including especially the Daily Spiritual Antidote, a 3-minute video, as well as podcast that is meant to bolster and nourish our inner selves. God bless you, and everyone be well. Thank you so much.